My business, like you alluded to earlier, is focused on the strategy and the operational aspect of the business. And I, like you, speak to people, process, and technology and how we use it. Uh, I lead into clearly defined roles and where you have your people on the org chart and the work that they are doing, the right person, right seat. And then the workflow. How do we get work done to align with the tech stack? Um, Ultimately, because I've also said if you don't have the workflow to get the information into the system, you're going to have bad data, right? So, or incomplete data.
Yeah,
So,
and I think we'd be remiss if we don't talk about the customer, right?
CRM,
Having, if you
something.
don't have good workflows that
Yeah.
actually consider the customer's role in the process, the
Mhm.
notification of the customer, the interaction with the customer, the transparency to the customer, then you're likely to create customers who won't say nice things about you.
Yeah.
And that's important from a marketing perspective. So,
Oh, and exactly. I think, well, to your point, I think that the customer experience becomes the differentiator in the market. Because in today's world, most companies are on some sort of technology and how they communicate and manage work with in the relationship they have with their customer. And so, how do you make that customer experience a differentiator? Make it easy, right? Um, and that creates the stickiness. It's not, hey, everyone gets an invoice, comes in through email or you pay
yeah,
through ACH.
yeah.
But no, what about the communication? What's the
I mean,
connectivity?
and the good segue there is, and it's really hard again for a small business, but again, I'm sure this is part of what you preach, is culture, right?
Yeah,
You want to employ and train and ensure that your employees are focused on that customer experience. And the way to do that is to build a culture around customer experience, not just say it, but demonstrate it. And so again, right, an owner of the business, you do these interviews and you have a conversation with an owner and they'll tell you, you ask them, what did you do yesterday? I put out 6 fires. That's all you had time for? Yeah, unfortunately. Well, then where did you leave time to build your culture, to focus on, on the management of the team that's actually delivering that customer experience? And there's a little of that deer in headlights, right? Like, how do I do that? And the answer is you got to commit intentionally to that side of your efforts, which is to work on the business, right? Whatever that looks
absolutely.
like for you, there's no, uh, you know, there's tips and tricks and there's lists and things you can do, but every business is different, right? Every group of people working together is different. Your rhythm is different. Your leadership styles are different, but you got to find a way to like weave these themes in, which are you want a great customer experience for as many customers as is possible, right? Because if you don't, that's another detractor to value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got it. All right, let's pivot again to another topic. Um, you talked a lot about recurring and reoccurring revenue. We talked about why it's important to the valuation of the business, but earlier you made a reference to the types of service work, being ITM, test inspect, move add change, repairs. Um, Go a little bit deeper as to why that is so important.
Yeah, I think big picture,
Mhm.
this connection to those with money who are looking to invest in your business and generate that ROI, they're also looking to mitigate risk. And so, if someone is going to their investment committee or their partners and saying, I've got this business, I'm looking at buying it, here's what I'm thinking the offer should be. If you don't address the risk component, then you're probably going to look like you don't know what you're doing as a buyer. And so, recurring and reoccurring revenue is considered more stable,
Yeah.
less likely to disappear when the economy starts to take a bit of a
Yeah.
dip. It may deteriorate a bit, but we all know that new construction, installation projects, big projects, put on pause, put on hold, uncertainty in the market, tariffs, all of that stuff,
Yeah.
and suddenly your big picture revenue items start to get pushed out. You start to get lumpy financial results, and uh, some buyers have a very long-term view and may be okay with that sort of like dip that happens when the economy starts to turn, and some aren't, right? And so that can get really sticky. But my point is when you've got, which is why people love security and fire RMR, monitoring contracts, contractual revenue. The fire business itself, people love it because it's statutory in nature, and the work that we do is required by AHJ, right? And so um, the more of that that you have, you kind of check that box that the risk is mitigated. The other reason is that tends to be the really high margin revenue, right?
Absolutely.
50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I've got a client with, RMR monitoring in the 90% range,
Yep.
right? I mean, fantastic bottom line EBITDA impact. He also does install, right? So there's a mix, but the focus is on that recurring, and so it's about mitigating risk. I mean, the big picture answer is mitigating risk.
Yep. No, I think it's, obviously, we've seen the playbook as it relates to, one, how to build a business, and then, secondly, how do you become more attractive to buyers. But one of the required aspects of our industry is that we've got to install systems, right? You
Yeah.
can't ignore it. That has to be done.
Yeah.
So how should owners think about balancing their revenue mix between service and install?
Well, so first of all, I mean, I think you and I have also, we've run into companies with owners that have been very intentional about just doing recurring and
Right.
reoccurring.
Yeah.
And again, it's a slower growth model, takes a long time, but in the end, it could be extremely valuable, and it will be, and at least very likely in the market that we're in. Um, it's hard to do that when you have an infrastructure that you need to support, and generating profit from installations is paramount. It's part of your business model, and you just need it. Yeah, I think the issue is just comes back to being intentional. Like, don't necessarily chase projects that don't give you an opportunity to grab some recurring revenue, right?
Yeah.
Always propose maintenance contracts. Look for the opportunity to get that test and inspect as part of that installation, right? And being intentional about it, pricing it appropriately so that you can win all of the business. Um, and, I see lots of companies and owners that I meet that will tell me that they purposefully avoid the bid opportunity. So they train their salesmen to look for direct relationships so that they have a better chance of getting the right kind of margin when they do that work and have more control over a variety of things, the collection process, all of it. So,
Yeah, I think again, it's I wouldn't call it necessary evil, but it is required aspect of what we provide. And like you said, I think that the most of the service companies will find themselves in a negotiated situation where they're doing that upgrade, that move add change.
yeah.
They may not do the full out rebuild because now there's a different, profile as to who's going to manage the project. But it works. When we talk about managing the aspects of install, just given the complexity of that work, what are some of the guardrails or some of the, I'd say the foundational pieces, owners need to think about when managing installation work?
Yeah. Having a job cost environment is critical, and having a commitment to using it not only to gather data, but to gather intelligence around your projects while they're happening and then when they're done and doing that post-mortem. Obviously, that's my lens, right? And it's the first thing I would say, and I'm sure there are other things, but I meet companies all the time that do $300,000, $800,000, million to revenue projects and don't job cost. Um, I think owners are getting smarter and smarter about the need to use a job cost environment. Quite frankly, even QuickBooks has a job cost module, like an environment, a part of the software. But what do you do with that data?
Yeah.
And so without getting too far into the weeds, you should have regular, real-time, weekly, bi-weekly meetings where you put finance, ops, and sales in a room and you talk about active projects that are in progress, the
Yeah.
WIP, right? And you talk about here's what we contracted that project for. Here was our planned margin. Here's how many hours we put in the margin. Here's where we are to date on the project, and here's what's left to do. And does that result mirror what you thought when you first proposed the project? And if it didn't, or if it doesn't, why? You must get to the why. And not only really for two reasons. One is to address that project, because maybe you can go back and get a change order. Maybe the customer changed the scope, and you need to be able to challenge the folks in the field to ask for that change order, right? And have that process in place. If you arm them with that process, you need to challenge them to get that change order. And then separately, to learn for the next proposal,
Absolutely.
right? And so there is a fundamental difference between those that don't have job cost and just go by gut, those that have job cost but don't really use it other than a place to gather some information, don't really use it the way they should, and those that regularly use it on a week in, week out basis and build their culture around financial discipline, even for those people who are very uncomfortable in the world of the dollars and cents, right? Ideally, you would hire people that have that mixed skill set. They're really good with people, they can manage projects, they understand the technology, and they have, good financial skills. Or you just have to train them through the finance side. To do that, you have to have a finance and accounting team that is more than just a group of people that know debits and credits. They really understand the connection between that information and the impact it has on running the business profitably. Because in the end, that's what you're looking to do. You're looking to do work that, at a minimum, what you've committed to when you agreed to sign that contract at that price. So,
Yep. Again, highlighting people, process, systems, and reporting, right? Even that
all of
job
it.
cost review meeting on a weekly basis is a report out. Where are we at?
100%.
Right?
It's
Yeah.
all it's PPRS. It's an acronym, and it's what I live by when I talk to every client. That's where it starts. That's
Yeah.
where it ends. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks for doing that dive on that. Um, one last segment, and we're going to be doing this in a part two. So, so we will reschedule another opportunity to continue the conversation. But
Happy
last
to.
segment for this recording piece. Um, you talked about building and preparing for sales. In a perfect world, we want owners to really do both at the same time, right? But growing your business, transitioning business, why should I act now as an owner?
Yeah. Well, and some people are very uncomfortable talking about this, but I'm not afraid to bring it up. And that is that control is an illusion, right? We don't have control. We don't know if we will be here tomorrow. So I will talk to an owner and I will say, among other things, if something happened to you and you weren't here tomorrow, what would your family do with this business?
Yeah.
As an owner of the business, you have to ask yourself that question. And you can't end with the question. You have to answer the question. And there isn't always an easy answer. And I'll use myself as an example. For a long time, I ran my business and it was just me until I started to hire others. And I said, when something happens to me, that's the end of it, right? I bought life insurance, my wife will be fine, this and that. And then I started to hire people. And then I realized that I wasn't being fair to my family under those circumstances, and I certainly wasn't being fair to my team. So I created a strategy. I hired folks at a senior level so that if I said to myself, if something happened to me today, what are the things that I do that others need to know how to do so that the business continues to run? And I have a couple family members that are involved in the business now. Both of my sons are involved. One does my billing and my accounting, and the other does business development. And so I'm confident that the business won't just disappear. It may start to shrink, right? Because I'm a big part of the selling effort. But in the end, my employees will be taken care of long enough for them to figure out what they want to do with themselves if Wise Financial does cease to exist, right? I also have my own exit strategy as a result of being prepared, right? So I asked myself the question and I answered it. And I feel good about the answer that I came up with and the strategy that I deployed. So why now? Because we don't have control. Number one, we don't have control.
Yeah.
Number two, hopefully, what people will have learned by listening to this is that they can end up with a much better business by having this conversation, working with the end in mind, right? If my goal ultimately is to sell this business, this asset that, created, some accumulated wealth that's embedded inside it, and I want to monetize that, knowing that's what I want to do at some point or may need to do at some point, what do I need to do to put myself in that best light? And it's all the things we talked about: financial discipline, good tech stack, solid leadership, customer experience and culture. It's all the things that we just talked about. And And why now? Why not now? Why wouldn't you want to start on building the highest value and have fun doing it along the way? Why would you wait? And the answer is because people are busy. They've got 10 calls backed up, customers, complaining, and employees that are out and they've got to step into the field. I've got lots of clients that I've had meetings canceled because owners of businesses, particularly small businesses, they had someone out and they had to go and do the work. Totally get it.
Yep.
Totally get it, right? But at the same time, you have to find a way to allocate the time to work on the business. And this is all part of working on the business. And so you and I have developed a strategy, series of checklists that we use, questions to ask, that create other questions. But in the end, we deliver a product, right? That involves a data room and financial statements that would be quality of earnings ready, right? And we try and lift up all the rocks to see where the mushrooms are so that they aren't there when they go through a process. And we've had enough examples of folks who have had deals start and stop, and where they've had to expend a fair amount of money in doing so to learn those hard lessons. And I say, prep now, and obviously we feel like we're in a position to help those who want to prepare now.
Absolutely. I think, our client, obviously working on projects together separately, we have, clients that are coming at it from different perspectives, right? Back office financial and how do I structure that, financial reporting aspect of my business. And the other side is how do I, where do I even start with regard to one, where am I going? Two, how am I going to get there with regard to objectives?
Right.
And then hopefully then we come together as a team to then also let's then support the back off
Yeah, I
back.
mean, these aren't philosophical discussions. They are very real and necessary to drive to an outcome that
Absolutely.
ultimately anyone who starts a business, I think maybe they didn't necessarily in that moment think I'm getting into it because eventually I'm going to sell it. Some do.
Yeah.
But along the way, they say, I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this. Why wouldn't I prepare it at some point to be sold so that I can enjoy the rest of my life doing other things, whatever that is, find your purpose in
Yeah.
some other way, so.
All right. So one last question then. What's one simple step a business owner can take this quarter? They're listening to this podcast right now. If they get off this podcast, what's the one thing they can do to start moving in the right direction?
Yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, my biased answer is hire us to help you, right?
It's,
That's the
it's,
easy one. But,
it's,
but, um, but uh, in all honesty, don't hire me if you don't have time to work on the business, right? There's nothing that when I experience frustration in working with a client, it's because they haven't allocated the energy, right? So in the next quarter, if all when you get home at the end of the day and you look back at the week or the month and you say, how much time did I spend working on the business versus in? And the answer is almost nothing on, and mostly all in,
yeah,
literally turning screws or getting bills out or dealing with your tax account or whatever. Find a way to understand all the work that you do as an owner. Make a commitment to the business to allocate some of that work to others or hire others to allocate that work to, right? So
yeah,
that you actually have the time to work with someone like us or an executive coach, someone who a business coach, someone who will do what we do to help you prepare for that exit. And in preparing for it, as I've tried to be really clear, you end up with a better outcome along the way, right? You're
absolutely.
focused on these four components: people, process, systems, reporting. It's not just about putting them in place so you get the highest EBITDA down the road. It's that your employees have a great experience. Nobody wants to work in a place where everything is reactive, right? That's not a fun place to work. So create a fun environment. The only way to do that is to work on it. And so in the next 3 months, find a way to allocate time to work on the business. That's my advice.